Hey guys, I couldn't find any better videos on YouTube, so here we go. Back to listening to me talk. So, up until now, we've kind of been talking about Canada in its little sort of eastern part, what we now know as Ontario and Quebec. We just finished talking about the rebellions of 1837, and now we're kind of moving into the what happened after that and what those things sort of started. Just confederation. Confederation is the idea of like getting all together and becoming one. Federation of like provinces, something like that. Whoops. So the Durham report came out right after the rebellions, and they were saying the Durham report said, put all the provinces together, and that'll make a stronger area. So after hearing this, some politicians had been dreaming about it. A union would mean a centralized government, so governed just from one place, and they would be in charge of everything. It was really popular in the West. Now the West was like Ontario at this point, and maybe a little bit out towards Manitoba. But it wasn't so popular in the East. The Maritimes felt like they didn't really have a lot in common with the Canadas. They had started out French, and kind of held on to that a little bit longer than everybody else, and they had different industries, different culture. But the idea was kind of intoxicating to the people who really liked it. Like they could create a whole new country that went from like the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific. You could create a whole new country and it would be one of the biggest countries in the world. There were some reasons that they wanted it and reasons that they didn't. So before this point, there had been a corn tax, which was basically just like a law that um, gave trading privileges to British colonies. If you're a colony of Britain, you were trading with Britain, and Britain would trade with you instead of other places. But then they repealed it, they took it away, and Canada's economy went into a depression. So at this point, Britain was trading with whoever they wanted. And they didn't really want to be responsible for the colonies anymore. The colonies were deemed too expensive. The Earl of Elgin was the governor of the Canadas in 1847, so this is after Upper and Lower Canada got smushed together, and he was the governor of that one place, of Canada. And it was his job to make responsible government happen. And that's basically just like a government that is responsible to its people, usually running from elections instead of having a monarch at the top who inherits the role. And they wanted voting. Reformist government that was in place at the time passed a bill that gave money to anybody who had lost property during the rebellion, and people were not happy about that. And this unhappiness culminated with a riot, and they burned down the Parliament buildings. So some advantages to Confederation: it would bring economic stability, maybe even prosperity. Tariffs between colonies would disappear. So before this time, if you were in, let's say, Nova Scotia, and your buddy was in Lower Canada, and you wanted to trade, there'd be a tax. Because what Britain wanted was the colonies to only trade with Britain. So they made it difficult for colonies to trade with each other, because Britain wouldn't make as much money that way. So if everybody was brought together, those taxes wouldn't be there, so you could just trade between the different areas of the country. Another advantage would be if it was all one country, they could make an intercontinental railway for trade and defense. And it couldn't be done just like piece by piece. It had to be a whole country sort of effort. And the reason that they wanted this defense is because the United States was just to the south, is just to the south. And at this point, they're really heavily believing in this idea called manifest destiny. So this is the idea that America was meant to be the entirety of North America. So they wanted their country to be like top to bottom, all just the US. And so they thought, come up, take Canada, it'll be easy. So if we had a railway down across, like along the border, that would be kind of a visual, hey, this is now Canada, stop. It would also make sure that BC and Rupert's Land wasn't annexed. So BC is BC, Rupert's Land is Northwest Territories-ish, but quite a lot larger. Yeah, okay, sort of. BC at this point, just that little baby there. Northwestern Territory. Rupert's Land was all of this. Ontario, what's now known of it, Northwest Territories for a long time. Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, etc. And so they were worried that the US was just going to pop up here, take it all. And then the other advantage was to have a better government. The Act of Union that put together Upper and Lower Canada into just one Canada was a really messy system, and it wasn't like streamlined. It didn't work very well. Modern parties made sure that everybody votes with one voice. So politics now, if you're a liberal but you don't necessarily agree with something that the liberals want to do, like you'll probably still vote with your party, and there's somebody whose job it is to make sure that you vote with your party. But this wasn't the case in 1866, British North America. Canada was governed by alliances rather than a single party, so it'd be parties coming together. And coalitions were the only way that people could keep power, but people rarely agreed on anything. So coalitions, again, are two like parties coming together so that they can rule together. But if nobody agrees, you can't decide on anything, nothing gets done. And the other part of this is what was good for French speakers was often bad for the English speakers and vice versa. So nobody could ever really agree. And we're going to skip this video. All right, thanks for listening. Tune in next time for what actually happened and not just talking about, well, why would it work? Why wouldn't it work?